Hi, I'm Richard Jarvis. I'm with CCH and I'm working on our new IRS Representation Certification Program. I'm here today with Eric Green, who is a partner in the law firm of Conviser, Percy and Green in Connecticut, and he practices in civil and criminal taxpayer representation there within that firm. He routinely represents taxpayers before both the Department of Justice Tax Division, the IRS, as well as the Connecticut Department of Revenue Services. He's an author and lecturer for the new CCH Tax Representation Certification Program. And Eric, I want to thank you for joining me today to talk a little bit about this new program we have at CCH.
Thank you.
You know, Eric, right now IRS collections is a hot issue. Can you explain why that is, and what are some of the trends going on now as well as coming in the next few years?
Well, to give you a little bit of history, Richard, what we've seen is in the early 2000s, someone very smart at the IRS picked up on the fact that they hadn't updated their statistical database called the DIF and began the National Research Program in an effort to do that. From that, they realized they came up with an error rate, put it out over the U.S. population, and came up with a tax gap of $346 billion. Mm-hmm. Congress saw $346 billion and suddenly decided it's time to let the IRS start hiring again. Enforcement is now really on the upswing. We had 2,500 new examiners hired, 1,000 new revenue officers, but even beyond that, the IRS itself has just gotten better at identifying people. And so what we're seeing right now, since 2005, through the good economy and the bad, is this continual growth upward of the collection division inventory, which right now stands at somewhere around 11 million taxpayer accounts.
Wow. So even with the economy's ups and downs, this really hasn't changed, or is this being driven by the down economy in recent years?
I'm sure the down economy has played a little bit, but even if, when you look at the statistics, from 2005, 6, 7, and 8, almost every year, the inventory has been marching up, I'd say roughly about 500,000 accounts per year. And that's through the 05 to 08 good economy,
okay, and
continues at that pace through the bad economy, 9, 10, 11, to current. And so is the economy playing a role? I'm sure it is a little bit, but not enough statistically to show any difference.
So this is just sort of naturally being driven by that tax gap that you talked about.
The tax gap, as far as exam and what's not being reported, but also the IRS has simply gotten much better at identifying non-filers. They're automated under Reporter, where they can identify information provided to them, compare it to the return, mm-hmm. and just send out a notice. It effectively allows them to audit many more people without having to have a human being go and do the audit. They also have now the automated substitute for return, where taxpayers who haven't filed, they will take the information, create a return for them, and basically send them a bill. That combined with the new enforcement folks out on the street, and it's clear that not only have we seen this trend, it's going to continue for some time.
What are some of the other trends that you are seeing out there right now with what taxpayers are getting in the mail and the kinds of actions that are being taken against them?
As you would expect, as part of the inventory growth and the people in collection go along with all the things that go along with collection. Liens, notice of federal tax lien filings are way up. Levies being served on third parties are way up. And so enforcement, which would make sense. The enforcement action would kind of march hand in hand with that collection division inventory growing.
So why should CPAs, EAs, people in tax practice, begin focusing in on taxpayer representation?
Well, a couple things. One, there are 11 million accounts in collection. And if you go out and you do a search through any of the databases for lawyers, there are under 1,000 lawyers that list representation or controversy as an area that they focus on, mm-hmm. which means it's not all tax lawyers doing this. There's a huge need, number one. Number two, this is a premium service. This is a premium service, and in fact, though I understand many CPAs and EAs will look at this and say, gee, they're problem clients. They're actually clients that need a lot of help. Bookkeeping, back tax returns that need to be done, the representation itself, and then not only do you have a client going forward, but But once you've straightened out their problem, these are folks who need to maintain their compliance. Whereas the normal person, you or I, you know, all right, we didn't make our estimated payment this month, but we'll get caught up. Once you're in collection, you can't do that. Therefore, that role of the tax practitioner is much more enhanced because they need to stay on top of their tax situation going forward. And there's also, as an aside, that opportunity, we'll talk about a little bit later, is potentially financial services.
Right, other services you can offer.
Right.
In terms of making it easier, you know, the IRS has historically had a very low rate of accepting offers and compromise.
Yes.
And so I think the latest numbers showed about 34% were being accepted. Do these programs actually work, and can people improve that rate?
Well, yeah, I mean, 34% was what we saw in 2011, and the IRS has started this Fresh Start initiative in an effort to make it easier to get an offer through, and that's probably why it's climbed up, but historically it's been between 20 and 25%.
Okay.
The real reason why most offers don't go through, to be blunt, is most are filed by practitioners who don't know what they're doing.
Okay.
Part of this program is to painstakingly walk the CPA or the EA who has never practiced in this area before how you go about assessing whether someone's an offer candidate. As a firm, we get about 95% of our offers through.
Okay.
And that is really driven by when that client comes in, that potential client, and we sit and do our consult, all right? We walk through their financial, and I do the same analysis that the IRS is going to do, which is what we teach them in the program. How is the IRS going to go through this? We need to do that. Frankly, we don't file offers for people that are not offer candidates, okay? And so can you do better than that 34%? Absolutely. It's a matter of the practitioner understanding how the financial analysis works, and it's not terribly complicated. But like anything else, you just have to understand the rules. Once you've got those down, this actually, then it becomes fun. Because then you're looking at strategy. Who can I help? Is it an installment agreement? Is it an offer? Maybe bankruptcy may be an option. All of those things that we talk about in this program and teach them, their offer acceptance rate, if they're following those rules, should be very high.
And that's a running the numbers kind of a thing. So that's right where the CPAs and EAs can do their best work.
Oh, if you can do a tax return, you can do this. I mean,
Okay.
I mean, not to put myself down, but this isn't rocket science. This is really a matter of, you know, and what happens is, I mean, if you look at it, very often practitioners, they'll take the income and they'll ask the questions for their expenses. Oh, look, you're negative, and send in an offer. You need to look at the IRS allowable. You need to look at, understand the rules of what the IRS will and will not allow.
Yeah,
all right?
okay.
And very often, though they may be negative on the surface, when you go through that analysis, they're really positive, hence the high rejection rate. If you know the rules, you can identify, you know, listen, we're going to do an offer, but the number's going to be X, or I'm sorry, you're simply not an offer and compromise candidate.
Okay. So with this certificate program that we've been putting together here at CCH that will help practitioners get started in this, what are some of the things that this certificate program and the training that you've developed will do to help the CPA and EA get involved in taxpayer representation?
Well, as you know, the program is more than 30 CPE hours. And what we've done is we've sort of assumed that the CPA or EA has never done this before.
Okay.
So there's no prerequisites, you know, needed. And in fact, again, there's not even a high level of technical tax knowledge. What it really is, what representation really is two things. It's process and it's numbers. Okay, so we will walk them through, for instance, how the IRS works, walk through the divisions of the IRS, how they work, so you're familiar with who you're dealing with. How does the collection process work? How does the IRS exam process work? How do appeals work? Prepping for appeals, what you can expect, and all of those key deadlines are covered both for exam and collection. We also review tax litigation. Not to try to make them into litigators, although they could go take the U.S. tax court exam if they wanted to, but more, it's helpful to make decisions if you understand the process, even if it's the process the lawyers are going to deal with. If you have an idea of where this road is headed, it helps you make your decisions now.
Right.
Do we want to fight the liability? You know, I've had CPAs say, well, you know, we can do a refund. Refund litigation, as you learn in the course, is very involved and very expensive. it's really where you don't want to be, okay? And so explaining all of that to them. We talk about payroll tax issues, both from the business as well as the trust fund recovery penalty and how you deal with that. There's a big body of misinformation that you can't compromise on payroll taxes. That's not true. You can, okay? We discuss, obviously, installment agreements, offer and compromise, liens, levies, innocent spouse issues, but we also get involved in criminal tax. Eggshell audits, which is that civil audit where there may be something criminal going on or a potential badge of fraud. What does the EA and CPA have to know? One, to identify it. Two, to know when their accountant-client privilege no longer works.
Right, okay.
And how they can get involved in that. And lastly, we wrap up, obviously, with ethical issues in Circular 230 and practice management. How do you market this service? Where do you find your clients? How do you handle that client from phone call to getting your retainer? Again, the collection client is a little bit different than your 1040 client, okay?
Right.
All right, and listen, we as a law firm do almost nothing but this.
Right.
And so, and we get paid. So there is a way to do this very profitably, but you have to be aware of that, you know, your retainer letter, your engagement letter, and all of that, and we walk you through all that. All the samples are in there, and there are case studies in there, so that after we've gone through these areas, we walk through a case study, one, so they can follow the logic of what we're doing, but also see all the stuff filled out. What is this supposed to look like? You know, when Eric Green sits in his office and does it, what does it look like, and what should mine look like?
Right, all these years of experience. Don't you also talk a little bit about how the IRS is structured and sort of how these things will flow? Like if someone gets a letter or someone gets a lien, and you know, who has this, and when does the machine have it, and when does a real live person have it?
Yep, both automated collection and revenue officers, the lien unit. We also talk about the taxpayer advocate, all right? Because the taxpayer advocate, even we hit snags where the bureaucracy just seems to be gobbling up our taxpayers' case. And there are times when we do go to the advocate.
Right.
All right. So yes, absolutely. We walk through all of that, and as well as dealing with IRS Office of Chief Counsel. When will you run into those folks, and the use of dealing with those folks and the appeals people. And again, we're sort of assuming that the practitioners don't know anything about the IRS.
Right.
For most practitioners, they'll have some dealings with them. They'll be somewhat familiar with it. EAs have taken the exam. They have some sense of how it works. But we just thought it was easier to assume you've never done this before. Let's start from ground zero.
Okay. So talk about sort of how the course is structured. How's it presented, and what does it consist of?
Well, the course is, again, it's roughly about 30 CPE hours. There's a video component where they get to watch me.
Okay.
All right. Go through the presentation with a PowerPoint slide component to that. So you have the PowerPoint slides, you have my explanation. There's also the written guide.
Yes.
That outlines all of these areas in writing. There are the case studies with all of the forms filled out, and there are all the exhibits. Our letters, our spreadsheets, all the forms. The allowable expense tables are in there because they need them for the case studies. It really, we tried to make as complete a package as possible so that everything is self-contained in the program.
Talk a little bit more about the case studies, because that sounds like a very helpful approach for teaching them how these cases work.
Well, in his background, this program really came out of all of the talks that I've done for National Tax Practice Institute and the ABA tax section, et cetera, et cetera. And what I found is over the years, I will sit and I'll blab about offers, but at some point, listening in the audience, it's all, you know, it doesn't make sense. It's all just, you know, words. Right. And so what we decided to do, my partners and I, is, you know, let's go through a case study.
Right.
And we'd map it out. And then we decided, you know, it'd be better if we actually had the forms, and let's do the forms together. And what grew out of all of this is really kind of a lecture approach followed by the hands-on workshop approach. Because the workshop, those case studies, I think really take all of this stuff and bring it together in a very, you know, and we've had that feedback where CPAs have gotten up and said, you know, I get it. I can see it. I see where you're getting the numbers. It makes sense to me. Again, not rocket science. You know, it's not rocket science, but if you understand, once you know how to pull this stuff together, it really is not difficult, and obviously you just get better and it gets easier and easier the more you do it. But the case studies, the idea of them is really to take all of the theory and bring it all down to very substantive how you do it, hands-on.
You talked a little bit about practice management a little bit ago. What does the practice management module in this program cover, and how important are practice management procedures in being successful at doing this?
I think it's very important, and the reason being, first of all, if you've never practiced in this area, how do you handle the client?
Right.
And I'm thinking more of collection versus exam. Collection, I know because I hear this feedback, well, yeah, I don't want people with tax problems, or they can't afford to pay their taxes, how they're going to pay me.
Right, makes sense.
It does make sense. These people actually have money, usually. Right? It's just that they owe the government more and they don't know what to do. And it's amazing how when we say, look, we need X dollars to get involved in this, family will come up with the money. They will go get the money, okay? But how do you handle that? How do you get retained? Do you do free consultations? I can tell you right now, we don't, okay?
Okay.
The phone call, the few minutes on the phone call, that is the free consult. So we walk the practitioners through from the initial phone call, the consultation, everything from which forms do you want to have handy. When you're sitting down with a collection, what do you want to have handy? Okay. What do you want to send out? Your engagement letter, we have samples of that. Also, just your calendaring of deadlines. Like everything else in tax, this is a deadline-driven business.
Okay.
When is the appeals deadline? When is the 90-day the tax court deadline? All of these things which we talk about in the course, in the practice management, we walk through how you want to kind of set up your system to track that stuff, whether you use Outlook or whether you have a physical tickler file, whatever you do. We also focus a lot on finding these clients. How do you market this practice?
Right, where do they come from?
Our whole world has changed. It used to be, and I mentioned this in the program, I would have the yellow book and people go looking in the yellow pages for whatever.
Right.
We're now in the information age of the internet. Okay. So blogging, the website,
okay,
writing articles. I mean, the one beautiful thing about this course is we have provided so much information. No one could possibly write out of things to write about. All right. I mean, payroll tax problem, innocent spouse. I mean, this is where we get our clients from.
Right.
I blog, and what I find is what I discuss in the program is that phenomenon where the national companies do all this marketing, and people go online and they decide, I'd rather deal with someone locally. And they do the search, we show up, and they come into our office with all those national companies' handout stuff,
right?
But they come to us. All right, so I discuss in detail how you blog, with using localism to get found, their website, speaking, writing, and also networking. There are certain groups of attorneys that are great referrals, divorce lawyers, real estate lawyers, bankruptcy lawyers, where there are tax issues routinely, and they're not going to handle them.
Right.
And how you go about generating that business. Again, there aren't enough people to fill the need that's out there.
So you talked about marketing services as well, and so what are some of the handouts and materials and things that you'll have available to help with the marketing side of that?
What I focused on in the marketing, in the practice management, is, Richard, they're going to have the PowerPoints. They're going to have the written guides. They've got the forms. I mean, there's so much material. I mean,
right.
And what I discussed in the program, what I do, is these PowerPoints are the PowerPoints that I use. All right, and when I go to talk to a business group, what I'll do is I'll focus on handling an IRS exam and what happens if you can't pay your tax.
Okay.
All right, because that's always this big fear. I can't make the tax payment. What are my options? I don't want to teach them how to do it, but what I'll do is I'll talk broadly. We have provided the PowerPoints. They've got all the materials. They've got the written guide with the outlines. And this is what I use to generate my articles. They probably have the CCH, the daily, with all the new things that have come down.
Yeah, the tax news.
All right, there's a ton of information there I discuss. I scan through that every day because that's where my next blog entry comes from. That's where my next article comes from. So they really are being provided just a tremendous amount of information in this program.
You mentioned briefly the national companies that advertise on TV, usually late at night when people are up and can't sleep.
Can't sleep, right.
How do those affect this, and sort of how do those affect you being able to effectively market your own services?
As I mentioned in the program, I read this somewhere. They call it the Starbucks phenomenon,
Okay.
which is where apparently where a Starbucks opens, you would expect the local coffee shops to all take a dive.
Mm-hmm.
But they're finding the opposite, because what happens is Starbucks creates more of a need. More people come in to the neighborhood, and what happens is they can't get into the Starbucks or the line's too long, and the overflow goes to the local shops.
Oh, okay.
And this, I forget which magazine it was, called it the Starbucks phenomenon. All right? We have the Starbucks phenomenon, or the National Joker phenomenon, where those national companies are out and they're creating this. You know, you can do this, we can, do this. So people go online, and at some point either call them and find out how much ludicrous money they want to do this.
To represent them.
Right. Or go on and just come to the conclusion they're not comfortable dealing with somebody halfway across the country they don't know.
Right.
So what we find is people go online, they look at all that stuff, and then they start their search. My blogging talking about localism, our website and articles talking about it. We will focus our efforts on our local market, because what happens, what we find, people will go out, look at that stuff, and say, I'm in New Haven, Connecticut. I want someone here, and they'll look IRS resolution Connecticut, and we'll come up.
Right.
They'll read my articles, they'll read my blog, and inevitably they come walking into our office, and they'll come in with all the stuff from the national companies too. All right, because they went and they read that stuff, but at some point they would rather deal with someone locally.
For the CPA or the EA who gets involved in representation, collection matters, and things like that, what can they expect to see from a practice perspective? How will this influence their practice, help them grow their practice, perhaps?
What I found from the folks who went through the original live courses that we did, there are a number of revenue streams that flow out of this. Obviously, one, people come in, we have a lot of non-filers.
Right.
Person comes in, the IRS claims I owe $1 million, right?
Okay.
Why? Because they did substitute for returns. You don't file, you don't get your deductions. They just take your income and send you a bill, all right? So we're doing back, the CPA, we don't do returns in our office, we're lawyers, but many of them they're doing back tax returns. We need to get a profit and loss for the collection, so they're doing the bookkeeping, all right? Obviously the representation. What else? What you learn when you go through the course is there are opportunities where financial products actually help the taxpayer. Life insurance, disability, health insurance. So for those CPAs and EAs that do financial services, they're also placing the products, which is sort of counterintuitive. People are in trouble, sell them insurance. But depending on the type and depending on the situation, it can be very helpful.
Right.
And the other thing, so one, after you get them all straightened out and do all the back work, you now have a compliance client who loves you going forward. But many of them have said the same thing, that when they began marketing this, they got new clients, not who were in trouble, but they like the idea that this is a person who fights with the IRS. If there's a problem, I like the fact that my CPA or my EA does this.
Advocacy.
Yeah. One of them said that they've gotten people, local businesses, who saw them change their sign, including IRS representation, because not that they are under audit or not that they have a collection problem, but they like the idea that if I do, you know how to handle this. I'm not going to have to go somewhere else.
Right. You talked about financial services and some of the things that go into that. Talk a little bit more about how the analysis could lead to financial services being part of what they wind up offering those clients.
When you go through the financial analysis for an installment agreement or an offer in compromise, what we teach them in the course, and this is one of the reasons why a lot of practitioners who don't know what they're doing just really do a terrible job at this. You have to look at not only what they're spending and what's allowable, but what they're not spending. Okay. Many times we have people that have an insurance need but either drop it or won't take it because of their tax problem. And what you discover is certain products are allowed. I mean, the IRS doesn't want people with kids to go without life insurance.
Okay.
Right? Go without health insurance. And so very often, one, you can help adjust their financial picture legitimately by getting them these products. It's an allowable expense. Now, for me, I send them out to a financial person, or I
Right.
send them back to their CPA or EA to do this. But if you're the representative and you can place those products, why not? Right? One, because it's an allowable expense. It actually will help their offer and compromise. It adjusts their financial picture. You're also doing the right thing by the client, because if you're, couple with 3 small kids, you should have life insurance. If you're
Yeah.
self-employed, you should have disability insurance. So there's it's kind of a win-win, where you're doing the right thing for the client. You're also helping them resolve their tax problem more cheaply, because it's an allowable expense. It gets factored in, okay? And it's a revenue stream that most people, until they take the course, don't realize even exists. But it's there, and it's necessary.
A little bit of information on what kind of clients show up at your door. Who are these people? What do they do? Sort of where does their money come from? And sort of who are they? Who are these clients?
I would suggest the number one thing that drives people through our door are payroll taxes. They're operating. This is why I'm always like, people are like, well, these are broke people. They're really not. They're ongoing businesses that have fallen behind. Payroll taxes, sometimes the state sales tax.
Right.
It's they're easiest loans to get, and they're the hardest to pay back. They'll come in, and they are more than happy to pay us to help them get this resolved, get them back on the right track. And what we see is they'll start throwing money at the old stuff. They keep falling behind on the new stuff, and that is not what the government wants. What
Right.
the government sees is ongoing non-compliance. So as we walk through the course and teach them, we deal with the current compliance. Then we'll work out a deal on the back. All right, we can save people's businesses. Also, there's that analysis of, is it worth not saving the business? But for the most part, the people that come in are business people, small businesses, closely held businesses that were operating just fine for a long time and have just hit a snag. We do get a number of the non-filers.
Right.
They came in, they haven't filed a return. They had one bad year, stuck their head in the sand, then 1 year led to the next and led to the next. Before you know it now, it's this huge mountain that they can't dig out of. And it's not uncommon when people come in, look, we have to go get returns done. Go here, get your returns done, bring them to us, gather up this. Do you have your profit and loss? No, well, we got to get a bookkeeper, get the bookkeeper in. So for a CPA or EA who does this, there's the person that walks in, I got to do your bookkeeping, I got to do all your back tax returns, okay? We got to get you into compliance, then we got to deal with the government, we may have to deal with the state. I had read somewhere, like the average 1040 in America is somewhere like $450. It was some lobbyist group that put it, I don't know how accurate
Cost
that
to
is.
prepare it.
Yeah, that the average fee for a 1040 is like $450. Our average engagement for a collection case is $7,500.
Okay.
Now, why is that? Well, one, we're dealing with the IRS. Do you think maybe we have to deal with the state too? Because when they don't pay the feds, they often don't pay Connecticut,
Right.
or whoever your state is. So we got the state issue to deal with. All right. We may end up having to get tax returns done, the bookkeeping, all of that work. Right. These tend to be fairly large, engagements. They can be very lucrative. And again,
Right.
as we're going through the practice management, once you learn how to handle the client, these are very lucrative engagements, all right? And you've also won yourself an ongoing client. And amazingly, which always, I don't know why it still surprises me after 14 years, but it does, they are often our biggest referral sources. I would think if I were in tax trouble, I wouldn't want to tell anybody. But clearly, they tell everybody under the sun, because I have so many contractors send other contractors, restaurants selling other restaurants to us, because they all know each other. They're all in associations together, and I guess people say, well, I got this major tax problem. Oh, go call Eric.
That's right. He fixed me up.
He fixed me. The bankruptcy guys tell me they have the same experience, which is also ironic, but apparently there's a lot of talking, but it tends, just to answer the question, generally speaking, it's active businesses, and it's normally, I'd say, payroll and sales tax.
What about the mindset for the CPA and EA? Because it's easy, you're a lawyer, so
Yep.
you have a different fee structure from what many CPAs and EAs would have.
Yep.
But so how do they have to have a different mindset to approach this and see it as a way to successfully grow their practice?
I've had that where folks have gone on. In fact, it was one of our webinars. Somebody had said to me, well, you know, you're a lawyer. You're charging $400 or whatever you're charging. You know, I'm charging $125. All right, which is fair. And I emailed back and said $125 an hour is fair for bookkeeping.
Right.
We're not doing bookkeeping here. Okay, like many lawyers have a different fee if they have to go to court. We are doing representation. We are going to avoid levies and wage garnishments. We're going to save their assets. We're going to help them potentially compromise this huge debt. This is a premium service. The CPAs and EAs that took the live courses that I've sort of kept up with, that have really used this as a huge revenue stream, have all come to the conclusion they're charging a premium for it.
Right.
Because and if you want to look at it that way, who they're really competing with is me.
Right.
All right? And I'm more expensive. So the reality is they can charge a premium beyond their bookkeeping fees. Now, truth is, they can use their bookkeepers to gather a lot of the information, do the bookkeeping, get back tax returns done. But at the end of the day, when they have to deal with the appeals officer or the IRS examiner or deal with the revenue officer on the collection side, they're charging $250, $275, $300 an hour. And that's a fair price, you know, for doing this kind of work.
So how hard is it to get started in this area if you're a CPA or an EA and you've got some tax knowledge and a tax practice? How hard is it to get started in this area?
It's actually fairly easy. There's no major software packages that they don't already have.
Right.
Where the course is going to walk them through the analysis. And if you're a CPA or an EA and you've passed that exam, you've got what it takes to do this. And like I said, this isn't rocket science. Once we teach you the rules of the process, I think a lot of people, a lot of CPAs get intimidated by the government because they don't understand the process. They don't understand, you know, they get these threats to levy, and when you don't know what you're doing, when you don't understand the process, when you don't know where your appeal rights are, and the government doesn't really, they've made it better, but they still haven't made it crystal clear. It's a very frustrating, intimidating practice. Once we show you the process, once we teach them the financial analysis aspect of it, I think they're going to find that it's something they can do. It's well within their ability to do. We talk about tax litigation. The reality is we're not litigating a whole lot of cases. Most of these cases, if we know what we're doing, they're getting settled.
Right.
And from that perspective, it's just a matter of jumping in and getting started. I mean, and once you go through this exercise once or twice, it's not that bad, to the point where when people call me over the phone, I'll say, "Did you get a notice?" And I'll rattle off the notice numbers, and those, you know, "Oh my God, you're amazing." Well, that's not amazing. I just do this all the time, but I know what I'm looking for. I know if we got the final notice. I know I got 30 days to file my appeal. Get it? You know, the course teaches all that. Once you get started doing that, it becomes second nature. And going through the numbers becomes second nature. And very quickly, they're going to find that they can identify, here's your installment agreement payment. If you want to do an offer, this is what we're looking at. All right, you aren't an offer candidate now. Why? Well, because you have this. Why don't we make these moves? In 6 months, we can reconsider an offer.
There you go.
That whole strategy, and you know, it's just a matter of getting comfortable with it. The course actually walks them literally from zero right through to what I consider to be very, very advanced case study problems. Where we have a failing business, we have 1040 debt, we have a proposed assessment against the wife who's not responsible. We go through everything. Right. All right. So when they do start this, they have a leg up. When something comes through the door, they should have seen it in a case study. They should have seen it in the material. There's not a whole lot out there that we haven't covered. Right. All right. So most 99.9% of those routine collection or exam issues that come in, they're ready to handle.
Kind of one final question for you before we wrap this up. This program is about 30 hours of CPE. How long would it take you to construct this kind of training for yourself if you tried to gather all this stuff up, find this information, and do it yourself?
I've been practicing for 14 years, so I'm going to say 14 years. Well, no, I mean, there are some great treatises out there. Most of them are about $1,000 a pop. You know, for practice and procedure and criminal and all that stuff. Of course, then you've got to read through them and call the information out. And a lot of this is just the experience of dealing with it. You know, a lot of the stuff I talk about when we're dealing with appeals, that's from doing it all the time. We do it all the time. Right. In the exam area, I'll give as an example, a lot of CPAs and EAs have this theory. They want to get things settled. They have to get it settled with audit. Why? I don't. The moment I'm actually very aggressive. The moment, and I promote being aggressive. The moment that I think the auditor's either not listening to me, or not giving me what I think is, when I say what I want, but what is appropriate.
Right.
I'll threaten them. Give me my 30-day letter. I'm going to appeals. Audit's done. And all of a sudden, they will back off. Not always, but we have gotten things done that way. Otherwise, take the case to appeals. All right. So a lot of the steps in here about when you're going to go to appeals, if you're going to go to tax court on collection, we point out several things they want to do right from the get-go. You don't want to just sit back and wait. That is all from experience. All right.
Right.
So how long that would take? 14 years. A lot of money buying treatises and reading them, and then spending a lot of time learning the hard way. But there are a lot of good tips in this program that I don't think you're going to be able to get pulling it out of a treatise. It's just kind of the scars you get from having practiced from doing this and just doing it.
Okay. Well, Eric, thank you for your time today. Thank you for joining me today. And I'm excited about this IRS representation certificate program that we're offering. So I look forward to talking with you more about it. Thank you.
Thank you.